Steeler Nation, it is the most wonderful time of the year. I think we said that plenty of times. The NFL draft is approaching. I am Jay York Football. This is Mic'd Up Sports One. I know this is probably the most wonderful time of the year, rather than getting married at the end of last year for you. Is that a good?
Oh, I mean, don't tell my wife, but this tops that.
I didn't want to say it. That's kind of why I was hesitant.
But I mean, all this prep and evaluation and things that I just have no idea what are going to happen. It's a lot of fun. I'm kind of happy it's almost over because I'm getting tired as well. But definitely excited for these next few days, man. It's going to be great. And we had a great guest on today.
Yeah, we're excited. So, Sammy, let's get to it. The draft is here.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. Steelers Crazy.
Harris Smith shields. Flacco. Polamalu takes it home. Super Bowl 43. Pittsburgh might be bound for that thanks to number 43.
The sickest Pittsburgh Steelers podcast.
Sports entertainment like no other. It's gonna be sick.
Excited to talk to a draft expert today, but before we do that, I want to thank our sponsors, Steel City Wheelhouse, of course. These guys are doing the dirty work, just like the draftniks out there who are parsing through endless amount of tape prior to the draft. Where the bar is set, tires for all cars, trucks can now be purchased online. SteelCityWheelhouse.com. Financing is available. Shout out Jay and Jay. Hope you're watching, John and John. Great customer service, good people, a local business. Make sure you help them out. Okay, we're really excited today. We have the VP of Sumer Sports. You could find him, of course, on Sumer Sports 2024 Draft Show. That's SiriusXM, NFL Channel 88. This is Eric Eager. Eric, what's up?
Hey, guys. This is the most wonderful time of the year. Optimism is eternal for every team, and everybody wins this weekend. So I think it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, everybody gives himself an A after the draft. It feels like, at least people in the front office. Do you kind of feel the same way I do a little bit, though, where you're like, all right, part of me is excited, but part of me is like kind of ready for it to be over?
Well, yeah, it's sort of one of those, like, be careful what you wish for, right? Because, sure. it is a long time. It's sort of crazy that, we talk about movements and all this stuff as this, like, Schrodinger's draft pick, like, that Washington probably has known for a month or two who they're taking. And yet we're talking about the odds that it's Jaden Daniels or Drake May swaying over the course of the last few months as though it's changing in their building when it probably isn't. And so, yeah, I do think the time between the Super Bowl and the draft could be condensed quite a bit. Free agency happens in March. You could probably have it April 1st, let's say, and still do well. That being said, once we're done with this weekend, we have mini camps, OTAs. The whole league kind of takes the late June, early July off. And if you're just an NFL fan, you're gonna wish the draft was middle of May. By the time you're getting to middle of May. So I agree with you. I sort of get annoyed by the takes at this time because it's sort of rehashing a lot of the same stuff. But in June. I just am watching old games on YouTube, I guess, as a result, because there's nothing going on then.
Yeah, I totally hear that. So you mentioned all of the chatter leading up to this thing. I have for weeks now felt this would be very chalky, but we are now seeing people left and right coming out and saying this is going to be the craziest draft of all time. Not sure if it's for entertainment value to get more people to tune in, maybe who aren't. But I felt for a long time, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, Vikings move up for McCarthy. What could happen that throws this whole thing off?
The Commanders taking J.J. McCarthy would throw the whole draft for a loop, right? Because I think all of us, to your point, think it's Williams and then some permutation of May, Daniels at 2-3. And then it's the question of, is J.J. McCarthy – Justin Herbert, that goes right away? Or is he Jordan Love, Drew Lock, Deshaun Kaiser, Will Levis? Is he one of those that traditionally falls? The betting markets have the number of quarterbacks at 4.5 juiced over. So they're looking at Nix and Penix possibly being those guys that slide into round one. But history suggests that there is one quarterback that almost always falls. And so I think if McCarthy were to go second, then now you're asking a question about, okay, may kind of make sense for the Patriots or whomever the Patriots trade the pick to. And then is Daniels falling, or does Daniels make it to New York at 6? Does Daniels make it to Denver at 12? Las Vegas at 13? To me, that's the one thing that could upset the entire apple cart. Everything beyond that, like if it goes Williams, Daniels, May, and then Cardinals go Harrison, and then the Chargers kind of are that pivot there of like, will they or won't they trade it? Then I think it's pretty straightforward. Then you have like Joe Alt, Dallas Turner, Brock Bowers at 10, possibly Roma Dunze at 9. Like there's a pretty chalky top 10 if those first three go well. But if McCarthy goes second, the whole thing is upset.
Yeah, interesting. And on the topic of first-round quarterbacks, I should have started the show with this. What am I thinking? We're on the Sick Podcast, Steelers Crazy. What are your thoughts? Russell Wilson, Justin Fields in Pittsburgh, before we continue back on the draft subject. What are just some initial thoughts you gleaned from that?
I think a very smart move by the Steelers. Obviously, when you're getting those two guys at their price, you're going to get a surplus at the position almost always because you're not even, mathematically speaking, you're not even working with like the average. You're working with the maximum of those two. So the idea that the maximum of those two is not going to clear the salary that they're collectively making is pretty small. The other part is that Arthur Smith, who I know got a lot of flack when he was in Atlanta, had some decent offenses in Atlanta with guys like Mariota. He also had very, very good offenses in Tennessee with Tannehill. Tannehill led the league in yards per pass attempt. They were a division title winner in 2020, and he was very efficient that year. Tannehill has the one flaw that both Fields and Wilson have, which they take a lot of sacks. And so his offense was able to, through play action, through protection schemes, be able to mask the fact that his quarterback is not a great pressure to sack guy. And that was always the issue in Chicago. They drafted Fields into a situation where he wasn't able to be protected, and their offense struggled as a result. And with Wilson, once he got out of Seattle, where, evidently Seattle was doing a lot of things to mask his deficiencies, namely having him throw outside the numbers and protect him with tackles, maybe not interior players, it was not pretty. So I think that the two quarterbacks, whomever starts of those two guys, is going to have a pretty good season because I think Arthur Smith is a much better play caller than people give him credit for, especially with that type of player.
Yeah, I have to agree. So let's break things down by position. O-line, obviously, Steelers are in need in wide receiver. Just talk about, how deep the draft class is. And obviously, O-line is a Steelers need. We don't even have a center on the depth chart right now, currently.
Yeah, so this draft, there is a projected basically like 16 and 16 and a half, either offensive linemen or wide receivers taken in round one. So that's half the first round. And so the Steelers are going to be in a pretty good position to take one of those two positions, and basically best player available at one of those two will be of value to them. And then it just depends upon like kind of how the scheme fits, again, with Arthur Smith, or, from an offensive line perspective where, they kind of did pretty well down the stretch. And when I say down the stretch, the last like 3 Mason Rudolph regular season starts, where they really ran the football well with Najee Harris. The playoff game, they were okay as well. Like, can they get like 1 or 2 extra players at that position to really take that offensive line from being kind of a borderline weakness to a borderline strength? That would help a lot. And then at the wide receiver position, as you guys know, the wide receiver position is much flatter. You can get better players from like 20 to 50 in the draft than offensive line. So I think from their perspective, they're probably going to want to take an O-lineman first and then a wide receiver second. But if the board shakes out a certain way where maybe Brian Thomas of LSU falls to them, or, they have a preference for a speedier guy like Worthy, or let's say there's a team that likes some of the offensive linemen more than them and trades back into round one, and they move back, and let's say they're picking at 29 or 30, then they take a wide receiver. Like, I think any of those things are possible. But this draft shakes out for them nicely relative to what they need.
Let me ask you personally, they're being mocked, picking at number 20 to centers. Is there a center worthy for the number 20 pick in your eyes?
Centers are tough. Powers John, the Oregon kid has been falling. I think that's a little bit of a tough one because Zach Frazier from West Virginia, both of those guys are kind of in that 25 to 40 range, and so it might be a reach to take one there. Also, centers, I think historically are players you can get in free agency, and I know that they didn't. But you can certainly get they've gotten Mason Cole in the past, guys like that who have started for them or who have, been starting caliber players. It's much harder to get a tackle in free agency. And hence, teams will want to try to get that position earlier in the draft. So I think if they want a center, it might be a situation for more of a trade back.
Interesting. We're hanging out with Eric Eager, VP of Sumer Sports. Make sure you find him 2024 draft show, SiriusXM NFL channel 88. You said 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock?
It's 7 o'clock every week.
7 o'clock every week. All right, let's hit you with a couple rapid fires before we get you out of here. Maybe a few players who will be drafted lower than some people think right now. You're going to throw some names out there?
Lower. Well, I think it starts with McCarthy. I think McCarthy's not going to be a top 4 pick. I think that's been taken for granted. I think Powers Johnson has been falling in the eyes of many. That's another one. Quinyon Mitchell, the corner from Toledo, who is still, I think, the favorite in the markets to be the first corner taken. I think he could fall as well. So I think those are a few players that I think are going to fall more than the consensus believes.
What about higher than the consensus believes right now?
I think Latu, the edge player from UCLA, has a shot. He has some injuries, but they have not been a concern to some of the people I've talked to. That's one. I think Byron Murphy is another one. He's taken a decent amount of money in the markets, and so he could be the first defensive player off the board as a defensive tackle. In a marketplace where a lot of defensive tackles make a lot of money now. And that's, again, when you look at the market dynamics of the league, the more money the elite players make as veterans, the more prized that position is in the top of the draft, because you want to be able to acquire those players without having to trade a first-round pick and spend $25 million a year. So that's where I think Murphy's value goes up.
I want to ask you about a player quickly that I'm not sure we've mentioned yet when talking about the receivers. This guy is, to me, has all the tools. And I don't know if he's going to be picked in the 20 area where the Steelers are at. It might be a little too high in terms of his value. But Adonai Mitchell from Texas really, really intrigues me.
Yeah, he's done, he was very productive at times at Texas. He had to deal with Xavier Worthy during his time there. 6'4", 300 pounds. Dealt with an injury in 22, so that's, I think, dinging his long-term production a little bit. But I think he's a great player, and Worthy was a player who I think prior to the season overshadowed him, and he took some of the shine away from him, which again, that's a pretty predictive trait for an NFL player to be able to take volume away from another NFL player.
Yeah. Well, hey, before we get you out of here, I just had to ask just some non-draft question for the Steelers. What would you be? We always like to ask our national media guys that we have on here, and because we have a lot of local people. What do you think the ceiling is for the Steelers this year?
I think the Steelers' ceiling is always 10 wins, and their floor is always 7 wins, and they almost never hit their floor.
Yeah.
I think defensively, there's a lot of talent in very concentrated places with Highsmith and Watt. I think Queen, there's a big question mark. He's still a young player. And so how well will he do without Roquan? He struggled without Roquan in Baltimore, but he was also 20 years old when that happened. So that's always a big question that I think, is reasonable to have. And then on offense, to your point, Harris and Warren provide a good 1-2 punch, but you need an offensive line. So you need those players to be able to develop. And then I think that at wide receiver, how much is Pickens willing to be able to take on that true number one role without a guy like Deontay Johnson there? Because rookie wide receivers are always difficult to count on right away. So I think that they're never going to be embarrassing. I think that whoever starts at quarterback for them will be good. But it's a division that's really tough. All four teams, as you guys know, had a winning record last year. So it's the Bengals are getting a quarterback back, as is Cleveland. And Baltimore is always strong, even if they did lose a lot of pieces this offseason. So to me, they're a good football team. If they weren't playing in the AFC North, I'd probably put the ceiling more at 11 or 12 wins. But in this division, I think it's more like 10.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like you said, it's always feels like it's going to be 7, and then Mike Tomlin just does what Mike Tomlin does, and another non-losing season. So yeah, just tell everyone where they can find you. I know we were talking about it earlier, but just so our viewers can listen. I know we'll be listening. Really appreciate your time, man. Always good to knack someone like your brain, especially this close to the draft. I know you're busy right now.
Yeah, so we have a live show at Sumer Sports. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube, youtube.com/Sumer Sports. It's going to be myself and Thomas Dimitroff, the former GM of the Falcons. We're going to do a live stream for the first round of the draft. And then Saturday morning, we're going to preview the third round. And then sumersports.com for all the articles, all the analysis. And then myself on Twitter, I'm at Eric Eager _ on Twitter.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric.
Great
It's been
stuff.
a pleasure. A lot of fun.
This is a lot of fun, guys.
Can't wait
Take
to
care.
listen. See you later.
Enjoy the draft. Yeah.
Yes,
I was gonna-
that's for sure, man. And
I was going to sneak another question in there when he said that he does it with the GM. Did I hear Atlanta Falcons? Is that what I heard? I was going
Thomas
to ask him.
Dimitroff, yeah, I think he's the former GM of the Atlanta Falcons. He wouldn't be doing a draft show if he was the current. Wow, he's an American soccer manager right now. But yeah, I could picture that hair and that and those glasses from anywhere right there. But GM from 2008 to 2020, so that'd be really, really cool. I listened to podcast on CBS Sports quite often with Rick Spielman is on that, former GM as well, and that insight is awesome. So that'd be really, really cool to for him to pick his brain, no question about it. But yeah, man, it's about to be here. I want to encourage everybody to go check out our recent shows. Loved our NFL draft profile series. 4 guys, I think, who are going to be really good NFL players. You have Chris Braswell, edge from Alabama. You have Jalen Coker, wide receiver, Holy Cross, who everybody is just says flying up boards. Matt Goncalves, who I have the Steelers selecting in my mock draft. I'll throw that out there. And then we just did Blake Fisher, offensive tackle, Notre Dame, who could very well be a Pittsburgh Steeler as well when it's all said and done. So I'm sad it's about to be all said and done, but let's have fun while we still can.
Yeah, I mean, it's if Omar does what Omar does, I think, like you said, Eric said it, every team is kind of optimistic at this point. You get those young players, the future's bright. But, the NFL, we say it a lot of times on this podcast. It's like beating a dead horse at this point. The NFL does not care about your feelings. And I think all the players can attest to that as well. So it's going to be interesting. But I will say definitely in Pittsburgh, just from the moves that they make, something that really stuck out to me in that whole interview, I wanted to tell you, Mike, when he said about Patrick Queen and with him not playing with Roquan Smith. And people were just, I think,
yeah.
I think we're so ecstatic that, that we got him. He's 20, like you even tweeted it out. He's 24 years old, but there is still everything. We can say this is our rival, if that's what you want to call them, the Cleveland Browns. They look good on paper, but if it's not amounting, it's like the Steelers in the preseason last year. Everyone was running to Vegas and putting in the Super Bowl bet. Put a string of games together. Let's see. And we have, we don't know what Russell Wilson, Justin Fields we're going to get. So it's going to be interesting. I think that it's going to, I don't think that we can go backwards from last year. I mean, if we're winning 10 games and making the playoffs, obviously Mason's gone, but don't have to watch Matt Canada's offense anymore. So that's optimism in itself right there.
I'm intrigued by Patrick Queen as well. I've heard a lot of that he didn't have a lot of success without Roquan, but he is young. He's got all the traits. He's in a defense that he won't have to be the hero, though. You still have TJ Watt. You still have Cam Hayward. Minka's back there. If he had to be like the guy, maybe he'd struggle a little bit. But he's a piece of the highest defensive, highest paid defense in the league, I should say. So I think he'll fit in just right. And also, for me, it's the reason they should focus primarily on the offense in the early rounds, because I think there are some great defensive players in the first round. Cooper DeJean, you have Nate Wiggins, you have some of those defensive tackles he mentioned, but you don't draft defense when you have the highest paid defense in the league and an offense that, quite frankly, was crappy the last couple of years. So I'll hold firm on that stance, that's for sure. Even if a guy maybe we don't expect to be there is there, you need to go offensive line or receiver.
I have to agree. We'll see. All right. Well, hey, thanks for hanging out with us. Make sure you go back and check all our draft profiles, our tweets. We're putting out content. I'm Jay York Football, and this is Mic'd Up Sports One. It's been another great episode of the Sick Podcast, Steeler Crazy. Shout out to Angry One. Shout out to Steel City Wheelhouse, and shout out to the Sick Podcast, Steeler Crazy, Sammy and Anello back in the battle station. We'll see you next time. Here we go.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Steelers Crazy on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.